This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. We're at the United in Compassion 2019 Medical Cannabis Symposium, and we're talking with Andrew Kavasilis. How are you going, Andrew?
Good, Andrew. How are you?
Good, thank you. Now, we had a great talk a couple of years ago about medicinal cannabis growing and licensing and where we're heading. What's changed from 2017 symposium to the 2019 symposium?
Oh, this one you can see, you know, the kind of speakers, the subjects that are being touched on, the relativity of the arguments being put forward by a lot of Australian experts. That's the real telling one, I suppose. Some of the new science coming out is really, not only it's come to the fore, but people are accepting that kind of research and that kind of data without questioning it now. I mean, you've got really good scientists and researchers presenting really, up-to-date findings that they're been working on. So yeah, that's the difference this time. There's a bit of a change in attitude as well. I suppose the holdback in the introduction here in Australia has struck a chord with a lot of people now, and so now there's the environment is sort of being created where companies and the people will be able to give more up-to-date information to governments that will influence future policy directions. So I think, this 2019 UIC event has been really, really good. Yeah.
Where do you think the major power is to elicit change? Do you think it's going to be the healthcare givers? Do you think it's going to be the policymakers? Or do you think indeed it's going to be the patients?
It's obviously going to be a patient-driven thing. That is what's striking a chord now. When again, what has been striking a chord has been the media portrayal of patients and that kind of being put through the media, and governments and politicians having to respond to that. So we're seeing that response in very incremental ways. But I think as the wave happens and more people are using it, and I suppose to an extent, unfortunately, more people are being dissatisfied, you'll see the governments will have to take control and do a bit more.
And you're involved with research. You do some research with Dedi Meiri, who obviously resides and practices in Israel.
Yep.
In email? In Israel.
That's how we talk,
In Israel. Why not do the research here?
I think Australia is really not geared up for that kind of research yet. Israel's had, a number of decades at this, and although there hasn't been a proliferation of products, I think they're showing us how you reverse engineer the use of cannabis for medical purposes. So that's the important part. If governments here would free up access to cannabis, our researchers here would then be able to work backwards, I suppose, and reverse engineer what's working for this patient, what's working for another one, and then putting research and data behind that to find answers to the questions we keep coming up with.
It's really interesting to me that the major roadblocks that I hear about that are blocking acceptance on a wholesale use with, let's say, medicine, is, we're concerned about safety. And yet you speak to the researchers here and they go, there's nobody that's died from it. So if we're talking about, if that is the only roadblock to safety, why are we not taking that away and moving ahead?
I think it's a bit more than safety is the excuse being used by those who are trying to stop it. And it's it strikes a chord with the community. When you talk about safety, you're drawing on that propaganda, that reefer madness kind of propaganda. So while that stays alive, we're there. We can have, and we do, and it's really great that more researchers are coming up and they've addressed the safety concerns, they've addressed even supply concerns, and they're able to scientifically explain that this isn't a problem. It may be in a very small number of people, but then it's compared to other drugs and you see that cannabis is rather benign drug. So I think still that the main obstacle for a government to willingly introduce medical cannabis as a medicine is still those blockages at the UN level, and people, I think, hopefully at the next one people will be more familiar with those blockages and using the terminology from the United Nations, from the INCB, the International Narcotic Control Board, and being able to link that kind of argument to what's going on now and identifying the obstacles and working out a way of how do we alleviate them. Will there be consequences if we break the UN laws and that kind of thing? We have a look at overseas and we can draw a lot of inspiration from them, but also have a look at the good parts of their regimes, have a look at the bad parts and the not so good parts, and we develop a uniquely Australian regime that the government wants to do, and wants to do it so bad that they write up a policy document and present it to the United Nations, and this is what Australia intends to do.
Why do we want to be unique? Why do we want to own something that's been a plant on Earth?
Oh, in terms
so
of
many
ownership,
cultures?
no. Well, in terms of ownership, under the UN rules, just like we have 2 or 3 companies that own opium. In fact, when you have a look at the UN rules around cannabis and being used for medical and scientific research, it just refers you to the rules on opium, and that detail talks about a lawful source. That's how it is. That's how it is. So, governments like the Canadian, well, no governments have really done this, but, in Canada, the High Court ordered the government to break those rules. In the US, you had those states that had citizens-initiated referendums that voted to break those rules. The Canadian government more recently chose to develop a policy around non-medical use of cannabis, and I think that's the route that Australia...
That's what we need to follow.
That's what we need to do, but not for non-medical use, but for medical use, yeah. And then we have to have a look, is there going to be consequences for our health system? Because you have to understand that the one important thing, governments don't own cannabis. No government in the world owns it. And if you accept that, you have to understand that, well, companies do. Who are those companies? How internationally legitimate are they? And can a government like ours deal with a Californian company? Obviously not, and that's not happening. Can we deal with a Dutch company? Well, yes, bend a few rules and we can do it. Can we deal with Canadian companies? Yes, bend a few rules and we can. So I think that Australia can put a policy together that bends a few rules, but is definitely more suited to Australia, our area, our expanse, and when we're talking about patient access, it really will be about strategically placed pharmacies and products that people can access.
You and I have spoken, and indeed it's been a big topic about access and cost.
Yep.
And we've spoken previously about growing conditions, for instance. There's some people favour growing conditions that is exposed to the sun to favour the terpene production in the plant. You're a fan of indoor growing, correct?
I think for medical purposes it will be indoor. I mean,
so that's totally covered from the sun, is that right?
Yeah. You have to understand, most people in the world smoke indoor grown cannabis. If you go to Amsterdam, you won't be smoking very much outdoor cannabis. If you go to America or Canada, you won't be smoking very much outdoor grown cannabis, especially commercially. That's been being supplied through dispensaries. I think, commercially, you do want to take every step you can to make sure that your crop is secure. There's no eliminating or substantially eliminating the risks of bird poo and insects infiltration and contamination. It's all about contamination and controlling what you're doing there. I mean, this is a commercial thing. Most of our tomatoes, or a lot of our tomatoes, are grown indoors. Our red peppers are grown indoors.
But there's a clear roof.
I don't know. No, some places aren't they? Oh, yeah. Well, we'd be talking about light as well. So yeah, it would be a closed-off roof.
Right.
I think. Look, I've done my own terpene testing under licence back in 2001 too, where we grew indoor and outdoor plants, and we've done cannabinoid testing. We've done terpene testing. We actually found more. We did find with the terpenes in indoor crops, they were more myrcene dominant, whereas the outdoor varieties, although myrcene was still one of the dominant ones, they really did have a more robust profile of other terpenes. But then even if you get that, you've got to find extraction methods that are going to keep those intact, keep them safe and viable. I think, we're still very early days, so trying to reach a gold standard in production and straight away is maybe not happen. And then you've still got customer and the customer choice and market demands. We see that in Canada and the US and so forth, people are they want a whole different range of things.
Yeah.
So it may not be just one thing fits all. Yeah.
So much more to learn, but we need to get on with that,
Yeah.
supplying these for access to the patient. So,
Yeah.
Andrew, thanks so much for joining us on FX
No
Medicine.
problem. Thanks
today.
everyone for being here. It's another great weekend. Yeah.
This is FX Medicine. I'm
Thank
Andrew
you.
Whitfield Cook.